It's a gloriously sunny mid-afternoon upon which we find ourselves amongst the sand, salt water and sea life-themed amusement parks of Galveston, Texas, an island city situated roughly an hour's drive from Houston on the shores of the Gulf of Fragile Masculinity. While we may not yet officially be even a month into spring, the island is already alive with tourists, eager to shake off the last of those winter blues, whether that be through getting a round-in on the Moody Gardens golf course, indulging in a little edutainment at the historic seaport or pleasure pier, or simply laying back and relaxing on the golden sands of one of the many beaches that line the island's shores. For Colt Phillips, Lieutenant Commander of the U.S. Coast Guard, however, there's no time to relax. With over 20 years of service beneath his dark blue operational dress uniform, if there's one thing he's learned, it's that an increase in traffic always leads to an increase in incident, an increase in workload and demand for a department already operating under the strain of safeguarding one of the busiest seaports in the world in the Houston Ship Channel. Even after 20 years, though, the job's still capable of throwing up some surprises. "Run this one by me again, Ensign Lewis," he says as he approaches the similarly uniformed young woman standing on the bow of their patrol boat, his low voice rumbling with all the grey-haired grit and gravel expected of a man well en route to being too old for these skittles. "Multiple alleged sightings of a large wooden vessel, Lieutenant Commander, sir, approaching the bay at speed," Lewis replies as she lowers the large binoculars through which she'd been surveying the shoreline to offer her superior a salute. "Probably just some punk kids getting overzealous with a toy sailboat. Nothing barely worth our time," Phillips scoffs, snatching a stack of papers off of the control panel beside Lewis. As the Lieutenant Commander begins to flick through the paperwork, Ensign Lewis returns to her surveillance of the shoreline and its surrounding waters, until she spots something that stops her cold. I'm not so sure about that, sir." The audible tremble in Lewis's voice piques Philip's interest, though as the old man turns to line his gaze up with hers, and as expression and heart alike fall almost immediately through the very body of the boat itself, he might almost certainly wish it hadn't. "What in tarnation?" Phillips and Lewis rush to grab whatever semi-secure service they can reach as their patrol boat gets suddenly rocked by the rushing past of a 15th century caravel, its distinctive triangular sails billowing in the wind as it surges towards Galveston Bay from the Gulf. The pilot of the ship, none other than El Pablo, though precisely how much control the Technicolor Technico has is up for debate, judging by the combination of confusion and abject terror etched across the face of his cousin Verana as she clings for dear life onto Pablo's disco technicolored life jacket. "Are you sure you know how to pilot this thing?" she says, straining to have her voice be heard above the din of the wash as it batters against the bow. "Oh yeah," Pablo replies with supreme confidence. "Sailing is basically just math, isn't it?" "Yeah, but you don't know math." "Astrology, then." "Where'd you even get a caravel, anyway?" "Oh, this has been in our family for generations," Pablo says proudly. "It was built by our great, many times uncle, Marco Polo Velando." "You do know Marco Polo was Italian, right?" "No, you're thinking of Christopher Colombo Velando. And he was a detective." "Idiota." Don't be so hard on yourself. There's a lot of us to try and remember," Pablo quips, his grasp on the target of his cousin's ire as tenuous as it is on the ship's steering wheel. That the leader of the Rainbolutions even managed to guide his vessel to within sight of the southeast Texas seaboard at all is, frankly, a minor miracle, having had to traverse a body of water so large and intimidating and with which he would appear, on the masked face of it, so woefully ill-equipped to deal. How apt. "And you don't foresee any kind of problem with this?" Verana asks, refusing to let the issue sleep with the fishes as a crew of trawlermen off the port side are suddenly forced to abandon boat. "You know, a group of Mexicans storming one of the busiest shipping ports in the US. You can't think of any kind of negative headlines that might conjure up?" "I mean, no news is good news." "That's not what that expression means." "Look, for the love of chaos, would you just relax?" Pablo says, pleadingly, evidently growing rather tetchy at his officer's petty insubordination. "I mean, I've got us this far, haven't I? Wind still in our sails, poop deck fully. I mean, I don't know a lot of nautical terms, but look!" He taps the screen of his smartphone laid beside the steering wheel, directing his cousin's attention to the map displayed upon it. "We're almost there, see? All we've got to do is slide into Galveston Bay, skip round Morgan's Point. Nice. Then just follow the Buffalo Bayou into Houston and it's straight on down to the sweet, sweet sworn unto soil and sanctuary that is Sugar Land, Texas. The perfect place to top up on these rainbowlutionary rations before Stranglemania. A broad grin spreads across Pablo's masked face as he dips a hand behind his Technicolor life jacket and pulls out a packet of Skittles. An incredible risk this aquatic endeavour may have been, but all Pablo can think about is the ovation that will undoubtedly be awaiting him when the rainbowlutionary Ravel rolls into Houston, and with the biggest fight of his entire life awaiting him in just a few short weeks at Stranglemania 20, that kind of attention is more than worth the risk. Besides, how are you going to find yourself up against the EWC's resident buccaneer and not ride into battle on some kind of waterborne vehicle? Trust me, V, he beams, tearing the packet open. From here on out, it's nothing but smooth Look out! From out of nowhere, a large green barge piled high with shipping containers full of lavender oil suddenly appears on Pablo's port side, as everything suddenly and dramatically goes to black amid a cacophony of creaking, splintering wood and Skittles being scattered to all four winds and at least half the seven seas. When our vision finally returns, we find Varana in Vertigo, the man, presumably, foolishly, charged by his brother with manning the crow's nest, sitting on the sands of the Bolivar Flats, a collection of bags from the Crystal Beach Candy Company at their feet and a still smouldering Caravel shell embedded in the shoreline a few short feet away. Well, it may not be Sugarland, but it's still pretty sweet, says Varana, before taking an enthusiastic bite of an oversized marshmallow as a rather more despondent-looking Pablo ambles up beside her. Bad news, guys, he says with a sigh as he stuffs his smartphone back into the pocket of his Rainbowlution X Shinajoshi branded cargo pants. Looks like AAA won't be able to get here for a few hours at least. You called the American Automobile Association? Yeah. Who was I supposed to call? Gee, I don't know. The Coast Guard? The Technico shifts his gaze out towards the Caravel, where Phillips and Lewis can be seen surveying the scene, having presumably given Pablo a Pacific Ocean-sized telling off in the meantime. Yeah, I don't think that's an option. Well, we need to do something. We can't just... It's fine. Dude, there's a gaping hole in... I said it's fine! So intense is the eye with which Pablo makes his declaration that it actually stuns Varana, and even a few of their nearer fellow beach dwellers into silence. Even Pablo himself appears surprised, the Technico slowly rubbing his masked face as a deep breath billows forth from within. Look, he says, more softly. The lavender thing was a setback. It was. But we're not sunk yet, right? We just need to patch a few things up, get the wind back in our sails, and we'll be all ship-shape and ready to rule those international waters once again. Pablo pats the outside of his pockets, presumably trying to find the Skittles that had been washed overboard in the collision. In the meantime, we'll do what we always do. We'll make do, he continues, as he plucks a fresh packet from one of the bags at Varana's feet and tears it open. Like, okay, Morgan's Point might be a little beyond our reach right now, but just up that way, on the other side of this peninsula, you've got Goat Island, which is a claim that both the captain and I could probably justifiably now make with regard to our respective pieces of plunder. Well, I mean, Morgan kinda gets his by default, right? Exactly, which, I mean, I don't want to speak for him, but certainly for me, holding this belt for as long as I have has been a bit of a surprise, just like the name of the lake across the bay from Goat Island. And on the other side, he points across the strait towards the city of Galveston itself. You've got the historic seaport, home to a ship nearly twice as old and less than half as interesting as our resident roughhousing rogue. And in between both there and here, you've got Pelican Island, which, I mean, you know, because he hangs out with a guy called Rook. This is one hell of a stretch, says Varana with a smirk, as she takes another bite of her marshmallow. Yeah, well, when you're facing someone who's nearly a full foot taller and weighs more on his own than you and your silent Disco Technicolor brother combined, you've got to get a little bit creative, Pablo replies, dropping to his haunches and extending the open Skittles packet out ahead of him in an attempt to attract the attention of one of the aforementioned passing pelicans, one that, upon completing its excited waddle towards the Technico, promptly hacks up the International Championship belt that it had evidently plucked from the water in the wake of the collision. Pelicans may not technically be foul, but they sure are disgusting. Tish. Suppose it doesn't help that in his last fight he literally tapped out arguably the greatest EWC superstar of the last few years, Varana says, suddenly less enthused to finish her marshmallow as she tosses it with a grimace back into the bag. To her own move, no less, Pablo nods, shaking off his title belt before draping it over his shoulder, then immediately thinking better of it and wrapping it around his waist. Not that he's alone in unseating Ms. Malone from her proverbial throne. He smirks. Screw it. We're already clearly on a collision course. Why start pulling punches now? In fact, he continues, The lists of names that the two of us have put to either Sword or Skittles over the last season and change are remarkably similar. Jojo Rush, Amish Shelton, Stitches, Cosmo Goldworthy. Pablo, unsurprisingly, lets that last name linger a little longer than the rest. Heck, we've even both managed to neither beat nor lose to Jason Anderson this season. I mean, that should tell you more than anything how closely the curators of chaos have contrived to intertwine our fortunes over the past, what is it now, 420 days near enough by the time that bell rings on Monday night? For Morgan, yeah, Verana nods, which is especially wild when you figure how many other champions there's been in the meantime. I mean, 6 Undisputed, 6 Indie, 6 TV, 5 North American, hey! 5 Hardcore, boo! 5 Fighting Spirit, 4 United States, 4 Tag, this guy, Pablo says with a grin and a point to his brother, 3 Dynasty, and just 2 International. Still hot on that captain's cat o' nine tails, the Technico quips, tapping his Technicolor fingertips against his title's faceplate. Just 70 days separate Darkwater's reign from his own. A drop in the ocean, frankly, considering the length of time between Pablo and the next longest current reigning champion is currently nearly 3 times that. As his gaze drifts out towards the ocean, though, a rather more pensive expression washes over him. This has been a weird reign, man, he says with a sigh. Like, beating the X Division record was such a moment, you know? Whereas this just feels... He pauses, synesthetic synapses scrambling to source a suitable expression. I don't know. I'd like to say that it's because this is Xavier's record I've broken, and that I know how much this championship means to him, but then he's literally the one who ended my X Division reign, so what do I care? He chuckles. I guess it's just because so much of the last 347 days has been taken up by other stuff, you know? I mean, it was barely a couple of months after winning this belt that we took the North American off of Ito. Then when I lost that to Apollo, it was only another 2 weeks until we won the tag titles. He gestures to his brother again. Plus, there's now the whole Undisputed chase going on. Heck, the 2 defences I've had of this belt before now have literally been champion versus champion matches. Oh, wow! Verana interjects mockingly. I've got too many titles and people keep wanting me to try and win more. I know, Pablo laughs, throwing his hands up in contrition. But yeah, I guess it just kind of feels like, as long as it's been, as impressive an accomplishment as it undoubtedly is, this belt and this reign's never really been given the opportunity to stand on its own merits, you know? There's always been something else happening at the same time, trying to siphon some of that attention and acclaim. He pauses, taking a fistful of Skittles from the packet in his hand and tossing them into his mouth. Still, what better way to remedy that than by beating not only a former long-running international champion in his own right, but arguably one of the most indomitable forces, one of the very biggest fish, metaphorically and literally, in the entire EWC pond, he continues, as his E-number-fueled enthusiasm slowly starts to ramp up once again. Make no skull and crossbones about it. We might have been talking about the match with Cosmo at Stranglemania being the most important match of my career, but from a purely physical standpoint, this is arguably the greatest challenge that a guy like me could possibly face, especially when I'm not going to have 4 other people to help me dogpile him like I did way back at Stranglemania 13. Heck, I threw pretty much everything I had at the guy last season back in Vegas, and I could ultimately only just barely drag myself to a draw. Although I guess at least we know now that letting a 400-pound pirate fall on you from nearly 10 feet in the air is probably not the greatest idea. Weird that you couldn't figure that out on your own, but sure, good for you, I guess, says Verana. Hey, I'm a visual learner, what do you want from me? Pablo says with a shrug before tossing another helping of Skittles into his mouth. Mind you, if you want to look at it another way, I quite literally took the full force of a 400-pound pirate plus gravity, and I still managed to gut it out and avoid defeat. To be fair, you were also coming off a run of 4 fights in 18 days, one of which was Brand Warfare, and the rest of which were against Nevaeh, Apollo Palomalu, and Mark Keaton in that wild Friday the 13th death match, his cousin notes. It's no wonder those Rainbowlutionary reserves might have been running a little dry. No such concerns this time, Pablo nods. And granted, the captain's also going to be fresh, having had the best part of a month to recover from his confrontation with the Queen, but then I feel like stamina's a far less critical component of the Kraken's game than it is the little rainbow fish who's trying to keep out of reach of his tentacles, you know? Like, a day or a month's not going to make much difference to his ability to just swap me out of the sky, but it could make a whole lot of difference to my being able to tie the big guy up in his own rigging. The sound of excited cheering and applause suddenly diverts the Technico's attention, though, rather than being a gesture of appreciation for yet another spectacular pirate-based pun, It appears to be a response from a cluster of tourists to one of their party having successfully snagged a flatfish on the end of his fishing line. Here's the real deal about this confrontation with the captain on April 7th, Pablo continues. He's proud of his own wordsmanship, even if nobody else is. Yes, Darkwater's a heck of a competitor, and a wily old orca to boot. See, again, his outflanking of the Queen in his last voyage is evidence of that. But there's a big difference between confoundering a woman as calculated as she and attempting to be the improvisational peer of a guy who's been perfecting the art of on-the-fly fishing for as long as he can remember. There's a big difference between having your mysterious associate rook into the future so he can try and guide you through the darkness, and having your entire dual design defining DNA be built around thriving in spite of it. There's a big difference between having spent the last season or so searching to find the magic and having spent your entire life fighting to become the most spellbinding son of a luchador in this entire industry. Condemning Darkwater's international ambitions to the briny deep is going to take a whole lot of innovation. I'm well aware of that. But I defy you to find a single individual in all the 7 EWCs who's proven themselves to be as innovative and instinctively adept at offensive combat improvisation as I. I defy you to find an individual who's proven themselves to be even half as capable of felling foes far more powerful and with way more mass behind them as I have proven myself to be, as we have proven ourselves to be. He gestures once again to his brother, who just continues to stare stoically out towards the caravel. Of all the opponents that the Discotechnicos have faced since the start of last season, whether individually or as a unit, I've racked up more victories against proponents of the power game than of any other discipline, he continues. Heck, when I won this belt in the first place, it was against Jojo Rush and Stitches, a combined over 500 pounds of psychopathic fury and frickin' Texas ribeye who had zero qualms about working as one to try and squash the little Discotechnicolor dragonfly that had dared to be in their midst. Yet still, I outfoxed them, I outmaneuvered them, I beat them, just as I've beaten most all the other krakens that the curators of chaos have conjured and set loose upon my synesthetic shores, and just as, on April 7th, live from Dakin Park in Houston, Texas, I need to beat Captain Morgan Darkwater. The Technico's expression hardens as he whips the International Championship belt from around his waist again and holds the faceplate up towards him. I need to beat you, Captain, he continues, clearly now addressing either the ether or his own imagination. As much as I respect you, and as much as my Shinijoshi sisters might hate to hear me say that, I need to keep this international title reign rolling into Stranglemania 20. I need to make a statement to show that the winds of fortune are still blowing in our favour, that what happened last Friday night was just an aberration rather than obliteration of any kind of form or forward momentum heading into the biggest pay-per-view of the year, because I know Cosmo will be watching, hoping, wishing, praying that you'll serve him up another psychological cannonball with which he can torpedo my undisputed championship ambitions before we've even dropped anchor in Ann Arbor. I need to beat you, Captain, because if I do, not only will I give myself a whole lot of extra fuel to fire me along my journey towards immortality, not only will I truly cement my status as the longest reigning international champion of all time, but I'll also show that anything our undisputed champion can do by beating Zero on Rampage, I can do better. I don't know what the future holds for me on April the 28th at Stranglemania 20, but I do know that when you and I face each other on April the 7th at Monday Night Base Brawl, there's definitely going to be... Pablo suddenly tails off, a haunted expression falling across his masked face as he turns towards the caravel. What? Asks Varana, confused. Fireworks. Kaboom! The caravel suddenly explodes in a deafening, dazzling display of lights, colours and noise as its smouldering wreckage evidently, finally, ignites what we can only assume was a stash of pyrotechnics intended to be set off in a rather more controlled fashion to mark the Rainbowlution's arrival into Houston. As any tourists in the vicinity rush to flee the scene, and as Lieutenant Commander Phillips begins to make an angry beeline towards them, Pablo and Varana, and the Pelican, simply take a final hit from their respective candy stashes. Maybe I'll cancel that AAA call-out, says Pablo. Good idea, says Varana. Viva la Rainbow.